So you've heard about fast track and the means to stop it. We'll get back to more about that later. But now I think we need to step back a bit and understand just what this treaty would include and what it would do. And to explore that with us, we're going to hear from Arthur Stamoulis, who's Executive Director of Citizens Trade Campaign, which is a national coalition of labor, environmental, family farm, consumer, and human rights organizations that are working together for trade policies that promote a just and sustainable economy. Citizens Trade Campaign was the first to publish leaked text of several of the Trans-Pacific Partnership chapters. And keep in mind that because this is done in such secrecy, the leaked text of the drafts is extremely important for our understanding of what's going on here. They've organized protests and other civil society responses at each of the negotiating rounds which have taken place and are taking place. And the group, importantly, hosts a monthly conference call to help organize the movement. So if you have a group that wants to get involved in this, you want to get on those monthly calls, and the information for how to do that is in the handout. So please welcome Arthur.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. I really appreciate all of you being here. I just want to thank the organizers of this important conference. So I've been tasked with providing an overview of the TPP, and also to try to tie the TPP to this question of public banking that some of you may have heard of. So I'm going to start with the big picture, and then I'll try to narrow in to that question. But just starting with the basics. So the TPP is an international trade and investment pact that's currently under negotiation between the United States and a number of countries across the Pacific Rim. There are Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and starting this July, Japan. Just among those dozen countries, this would be the largest free trade agreement in U.S. history, covering approximately 40% of the global economy. So a very big deal in its own right. But the TPP has the potential to be even bigger than that, because it's being negotiated explicitly as what's called a docking agreement, meaning that other countries can dock on or join over time. And countries like the Philippines, Thailand, Colombia, and this past week even China have been talking about potentially joining the TPP. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, which negotiates the pact on behalf of the United States, has said that the TPP is open to any Pacific Rim country that, quote unquote, meets the high standards we're setting for the pact. And, they've said that they foresee the TPP eventually covering half the countries of the world. So this is quite literally a big deal. And, I don't know how many of you have been fighting corporate globalization, for a while now, but for those of you who have, what this is an end run around the People's Movement victory at the World Trade Organization, the WTO, where ever since the battle in Seattle in 1999, corporations have been trying to use the WTO to expand their agenda of more deregulation, more privatization, more liberalization. And ever since 99, various countries have been, within the WTO, have been saying no. And because the WTO ostensibly works by consensus, and thanks to a lot of good cross-border organizing, there's been a stalemate there about whether or not to move forward with big parts of the corporate agenda. And so corporations view the TPP as their way to get around that stalemate, to basically work through their proxy, the U.S. government, to cherry-pick those countries that are most willing to play ball with what they want, to set the rules of the game among that handful of countries, and then to use the docking mechanism over a period of years to pressure other countries to join on one at a time. And so the TPP is absolutely, as its architects claim, a standard-setting pact for the 21st century. Okay, but what exactly does the TPP do? I guess the first thing to acknowledge is that we don't know entirely. As was alluded to, after 3 years and more than 17 major rounds of negotiations, the Obama administration still refuses to tell the American public what it's been proposing in our names, and it's required that other countries sign agreements preventing them from sharing draft texts as well. What we know about the TPP comes not from our own government, but from those handful of leaked texts and also, frankly, from conversations one-on-one with negotiators from other countries. That said, we do have a pretty good picture of the pact's overall direction, and certainly corporations have not been shy over the years about saying what they want. But that's not exactly the same as me being able to pull up a draft online and show it to you, or show it to a congressional staffer, or show it to a reporter. And this is a rollback in transparency, by the way. The Bush administration and 33 other countries released draft texts for the Free Trade Area of the Americas, which is the last big attempt at a corporate power grab like this one. Draft texts are routinely published on the WTO website. This is a rollback, an intentional rollback, and I believe it's because the administration knows that if information got out about what they're proposing, the public would oppose it. And certainly we've seen that with the draft chapters that have leaked, where civil society in those areas, like healthcare, like internet freedom groups, have been doing the most organizing and the most mobilizing. Meanwhile, of course, while the administration keeps the public shut out from the process, as was alluded to, they have granted approximately 600 corporate lobbyists access to the text, so that Walmart, Chevron, Cargill, others have special cleared advisor status that allows them to inform the process in real time and have a big say in what the TPP contains. So to me, the entire process reeks of corruption. It's very clearly a backroom deal for transnational capital, but let's talk about what corporations want, and real quickly here. The retailers, the brands, the manufacturers, by which I mean the Walmarts, the Targets, the Nikes, the General Electrics, they want what they've always wanted, which was cheaper and cheaper labor. In a variety of ways, the TPP will increase their access to low-cost labor markets in countries like Vietnam, where the average minimum wage is, in fact, a third of what it is in China's manufacturing centers. You're absolutely right that this is a trade pact for corporations that feel that Chinese workers are overpaid. The AFL-CIO's Executive Council has warned that the TPP jeopardizes literally millions of American jobs, far more than the recent Korea Free Trade Agreement or CAFTA or even NAFTA. This has the potential to be the most damaging trade agreement for working people ever. And again, it's not just about undercutting wages and worker power here in the United States. It's about undercutting wages and worker power throughout the world. And I don't think even the people who work on these issues have fully grasped just how serious that is. But let me move on. So leaked documents show that the pharmaceutical industry is pushing for the TPP to extend the length of their monopoly drug patents. I know Margaret's going to talk more about its impact on healthcare later, but I'll just summarize by pointing out that the Nobel Peace Prize winning group, Doctors Without Borders, has said that the TPP is the worst pact ever for access to medicines. And again, it's because of the leaked documents that they even got involved. Big Ag is pushing for the TPP to allow them to dump more taxpayer-subsidized wheat and corn and soy and sugar and rice onto other countries, having the effect of devastating family farmers in Japan and Malaysia and elsewhere, just has already been done to Mexico and Central America under NAFTA and CAFTA. The so-called life sciences companies want the TPP to introduce further caps on food safety and consumer right-to-know measures, and I could go on. I mean, there's certainly other interests, industries with specific interests, be it the extractive industries, be it Hollywood, others. But let me just skip ahead and talk about Wall Street. What we do know that the TPP contains a financial service chapter. It's not one that's leaked, so I can't tell you, exactly what's been proposed. But I can tell you what was included in the much smaller Korea Free Trade Agreement that passed in recent years. The Korea Free Trade Agreement contained provisions that prohibit governments from placing limits on the size of banks, insurance companies, and hedge funds, i.e., no regulations designed to safeguard against too big to fail. The Korea Free Trade Agreement contained provisions prohibiting bans on the sale of any specific type of financial instrument. So banning a particular risky derivative would be prohibited. Not just the risky products we already know about, but whatever the wizards on Wall Street create 10 or 20 years from now. We're not allowed to ban the sale of those products either. Implementing firewalls between different types of financial service providers is also expected to be prohibited under the TPP. So we've heard repeatedly this weekend of the Depression-era Glass-Steagall Act, which was gutted under the Clinton administration. Attempts to reestablish those firewalls between commercial and investment banks are already prohibited, frankly, under some of our trade agreements, and that would be further entrenched under the TPP. The TPP is also expected to limit or ban the use of capital controls. Now, capital controls aren't something we use too much here in the United States, but other countries, and we heard about Iceland today, have used them to slow the spread of financial crises by regulating hot money flows into and out of a country. And these, frankly, are provisions that, depending on how they're written, could also prohibit many types of financial transaction taxes. And so the financial services chapter is something certainly that everyone should care about and be following and be aware of. But I think there are, frankly, chapters of even greater concern to those working on public banking specifically. One of those chapters is the state-owned enterprises chapter. I'll just say from the start that our coalition has a number of unions that are very worried about having to compete with imports from overseas state-owned enterprises in the industrial sector. These are companies that often get access to preferential financing, low-cost energy, other benefits that have undercut U.S. employers. And so the U.S. labor movement has been pushing for the TPP to include safeguards that require exporting firms to compete on a more level playing field. And, we fought for years for labor and environmental protections to be included in trade agreements, to lift living standards for working people around the world. And now things like currency manipulation and state-owned enterprises are getting a lot more attention. In a perfect world, these would be standards that would be well written. They would further the goal of creating a more just and sustainable global economy. But I think we know, as with everything, the devil is in the details. And the corporate interest groups pushing for SOE provisions do not have the same interests as labor unions pushing for SOE provisions. One of the legal concepts that's sure to be included in an SOE chapter is the idea of national treatment or non-discrimination. And what that means is that any sort of preferential treatment given to a state-owned enterprise would have to be given to its private sector competitors as well. The TPP's definition of a state-owned enterprise isn't public, so I can't tell you that every public bank would fall under it. But I think it's pretty safe to assume that many, if not most, would. And assuming that's the case, under national treatment rules, if your public bank is getting government guarantees on debt financing, exemptions from certain taxes, special access to government business or government deposits, the easing of regulatory constraints, any sort of other direct subsidies or indirect subsidies that the private sector would want access to, the government would have to provide foreign businesses in that sector with the same benefits. And the flip side of that same coin is that the SOE chapter and potentially other parts of the pact could likewise require that any low-cost loans or other services provided by your public bank to local businesses also be provided to transnational corporations. And so, you may want your bank to support California wine growers, and that's fine, just so long as they're also giving the same deals to winemakers in Chile and Australia and, elsewhere throughout the world. It's hard to say what's going to be in there exactly. And frankly, I don't know if anyone has done the hard analysis of the Korea-U.S. free trade agreement yet, with public banking specifically in mind. Australia's public competitive neutrality guidelines are another area where serious scholars could be looking. But I do think it's safe to say that public banking could very much be at risk under the TPP. Just recently, the Obama administration formally welcomed Japan's interest in joining. And one of the things that Japan reportedly agreed to in order to get a seat at the table is to further open its domestic insurance market. Reuters specifically reported that Japan Post Insurance, which is a state-owned firm, has specifically promised not to sell new cancer insurance policies or other standalone medical insurance policies until after the TPP is completed and international competition is introduced in those sectors, and that the Japan Post has a, quote, properly functioning business management system in place. So clearly, Wall Street is already capitalizing on the TPP's SOE provisions, and they're not even written yet. Let me also just really quickly mention one of the chapters of the TPP that has leaked, and that's the so-called investment chapter. What that chapter shows is that the U.S. is pushing for transnational corporations to be able to unilaterally initiate enforcement actions under the pact. So the investment chapter would allow any transnational corporation who feels that a government action, be it a new law, a new regulation, a permitting decision, a court decision, violates a term of the TPP and negatively cuts into their expectation of profits, they can challenge that, and they can demand compensation through an international tribunal system that circumvents the U.S. court system or any other country's domestic judicial system. This is called investor-to-state dispute resolution. Under the World Trade Organization, we already have what's called state-to-state dispute resolution, where governments can challenge each other's policies as trade violations. And under that system, the United States has already lost more than 90% of the more than 65 cases brought against us with portions of the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, all being attacked and chopped back. More recently, the U.S. has lost cases pertaining to internet gambling restrictions, tobacco controls, country of origin labeling for meat products. Where the TPP goes beyond the WTO is, again, in allowing individual corporations, elevating them to the level of nation states and allowing them to initiate those challenges themselves in these extrajudicial tribunals. And I know a lot of you likely work with Move to Amend and have been fighting corporate personhood for years. This goes beyond corporate personhood in that citizens don't have access to these tribunals. People don't. Domestic businesses certainly don't. It's just transnational corporations. And again, these tribunals effectively overturn our laws, our regulations, and even our court decisions. The tribunals cannot literally force a country to change its laws, but what it can do is order any size dollar penalty it chooses, such that if a country doesn't want additional cases brought against it, it gets in line. I'll mention that the United States is already party to a number of free trade agreements and bilateral investment treaties that have this private investor-to-state dispute resolution, but with a few notable exceptions, it's mainly with small developing countries. And so the history has been for U.S.-based transnationals to attack and gut the democratic processes of much smaller nations. The TPP would dramatically expand the system throughout the Pacific Rim. My expectation is that it'll still be small nations that bear the brunt of it, but certainly with big capital exporting nations like Japan involved, the chickens could come home to roost, and we can start seeing a lot more of our own policies attacked and undercut. That's not specific to public banking by any means. Honestly, it's environmental policies and consumer right-to-know policies that have come under attack the most to date and will likely be attacked first. Certainly the extractive industries and big ag have the most experience abusing this system. Still, the point is a foreign government wouldn't need to initiate a challenge and have a beef with a public bank in California or elsewhere in the United States to challenge it under the TPP. Any foreign financial service provider could do so, and frankly, any Wall Street firm's overseas subsidiary could likely do so. Let me just wrap up very quickly by saying two things. The first is don't let a trade agreement prevent you from pushing forward with a public bank or any other piece of public policy you think is important. As much as corporations hope and expect that the TPP will force deregulation in other countries, they also hope that it'll have a chilling effect on regulations and public policy in this country. They view pacts like the TPP as an opportunity to implement new laws that they could never pass through Congress as a standalone bill. And, I haven't seen the TPP tax done on SOEs in the financial service chapter. I don't know for a fact that any public bank proposal is definitely a violation of the TPP, and it's not our job to argue that it is. If some corporation wants to bring a suit, let them bring a suit. Let's fight it together, and if years down the road we lose, let's use that as more fodder to expand the movement to reverse our awful trade policies. But that's the first note. The second thing I want to say in conclusion is that there is a long, proud history of cross-border people's movements defeating corporate power grabs disguised as trade agreements. I suspect Kevin's going to talk about this more, but there's no reason for despair here. With a little effort, we will defeat the TPP, and there are lots of tools out there to help you do that. And I look forward to talking about them during the Q&A. So thank you.